So you think you know American history? Cute. You learned the cleaned-up gift shop version, where every town on the map earned its spot and stayed there like a good little dot. Meanwhile, your government has been quietly erasing entire towns off the map for over 100 years, drowning them under lakes, bulldozing them for stadiums, burning them to the ground, fencing them off because the dirt is literally radioactive, and in one case condemning a whole town because the ground under it has been on fire since 1962. Yeah, on fire, right now. And you've probably driven past where some of these places used to be without a clue because nobody wanted you to remember they existed. So before you brag about acing that history class, here are 111 American towns that got deleted. And number 1 is still burning as we speak. 1. Picture a town so stubborn it has been on fire underground since 1962 and still acts like everything is fine. Centralia, Pennsylvania, sat on a fat coal seam until some genius decided to burn trash near an old mine. Because what could possibly go wrong? The fire crawled underground and threw a tantrum that never ended. Roads cracked, smoke oozed from people's gardens, and the government finally said, nope, condemned the whole circus, and yanked its zip code like a disappointed parent. 2. Meet Vanport, the city that got erased faster than a bad first date. It was Oregon's second biggest town, slapped together for shipyard workers, and officials kept swearing the dikes were rock solid, trust us, bro. Then in 1948, on a perfectly nice afternoon, one dike folded like wet cardboard and a wall of water gulped the entire town. Folks dropped their sandwiches and ran for the hills while their homes floated away, and Oregon basically said, yeah, we are not rebuilding that. 3. Welcome to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a city of 75,000 people the government basically pretended did not exist. They built it in total secret to cook up atomic bomb material, then forgot to put it on any map, like a kid hiding a bad report card. Workers did mysterious jobs they were not allowed to understand and signed papers swearing they would never blab. Whole families lived in a town that officially was not there. 4. Picture buying the most famous park in America and learning somebody got bulldozed first. Before Central Park, there was Seneca Village, a thriving community of Black and Irish families who owned land and minded their business. In 1857, New York City looked at their tidy homes and decided grass mattered more than people. So they evicted everyone and dumped a park on top. Today, joggers huff past with no idea they are stomping on somebody's erased front yard. 5. Imagine being so successful that a whole mob shows up jealous. Greenwood, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was called Black Wall Street because black entrepreneurs built a district so rich it made everyone else look broke. They had hotels, theaters, doctors, the works, while certain neighbors seethed with envy. In 1921, a ridiculous rumor sparked a white mob that burned the whole place to ash in hours. Decades of brilliant hustle gone, and the city spent ages pretending it never happened. 6. Behold St. Thomas, Nevada, a town that lost a slow-motion fight with a lake. Folks lived there happily until the government built Hoover Dam, and casually mentioned a reservoir would be filling in soon. Sorry about your house. The last stubborn resident reportedly paddled away in a boat as water lapped at his door. Lake Mead swallowed the whole town in the 1930s. Now during droughts, the creepy ruins resurface like the town is filing a complaint. 7. Meet Pithole, Pennsylvania, the town that lived fast and died embarrassingly young. Somebody struck oil and within weeks thousands of fortune hunters stampeded in, throwing up hotels, saloons, and a wildly busy post office. It became a real city overnight, drunk on its own success. Then the oil ran dry almost as fast as it appeared, and everybody vanished like rats fleeing a flaming ship. In about a year, the booming metropolis collapsed back into empty cowfields. 8. Picture an entire colony of English settlers vanishing and leaving one cryptic word, like a horror movie. Roanoke in North Carolina was supposed to be England's shiny first foothold in America. The leaders sailed back for supplies, got delayed for years, and finally returned to find absolutely nobody home. No people, no struggle, just the word Croatoan carved into a post. Historians have argued about it for centuries while the colonists pulled off history's greatest disappearing act. 9. Imagine 4 entire towns getting legally deleted so a faraway city could have a refreshing drink. In 1938, Massachusetts looked at the Swift River Valley, where 4 perfectly nice towns were living their lives, and decided Boston needed their land more. So officials erased the towns, dug up the cemeteries, evicted everyone, and flooded the valley to make the Quabbin Reservoir. Now millions sip that water clueless that beneath the pretty surface sit 4 drowned towns, silently judging every glass. 10. Welcome to Los Alamos, New Mexico, where thousands of brilliant scientists officially shared one mailbox like the world's most cramped roommates. The government built this town in total secrecy to design the atomic bomb, then hid it so well that everyone's mail went to a single address, P.O. Box 1663. Babies born there got that box listed as their birthplace, which is awkward to explain later. The whole town did not appear on maps and somehow still expected its packages. 11. Meet Times Beach, Missouri, a town that got poisoned because someone wanted cheaper dust control. The roads were dirt, so the town hired a guy to spray waste oil to keep the dust down, which sounded thrifty until everybody learned that oil was loaded with dioxin, one of the nastiest chemicals around. Horses dropped dead, kids got sick, and scientists basically screamed run. So, the government bought the entire town, bulldozed it, and left nothing but the cautionary tale of the world's worst road maintenance plan. 12. Behold Bodie, California, a gold town so rowdy it apparently had a murder before breakfast most days. Thousands of miners poured in chasing riches, building saloons, brothels, and a reputation so wild that parents reportedly prayed their daughters would not end up there. Then the gold thinned out, and people sprinted for the exits, leaving plates on tables and goods on shelves. Today, it sits frozen in something called arrested decay, which is a fancy way of saying nobody bothered to clean up. 13. Picture getting evicted from your home so a baseball team could have parking. Chavez Ravine in Los Angeles was a tight Mexican-American community that got promised shiny new public housing if they would just leave. Families packed up trusting the deal. The housing never came. And instead, the land magically transformed into Dodger Stadium. Some holdouts had to be physically dragged from their houses on camera. Now fans munch hot dogs over the bones of broken promises, cheering loudly and knowing absolutely none of it. 14. Meet Rosewood, Florida, a black town that was thriving until a single lie torched everything. In 1923, a white woman made an accusation that historians widely doubt, and a mob decided that was reason enough to descend on Rosewood with guns and torches. They burned homes, hunted families through the swamps, and wiped the town off the map in days. Survivors scattered and stayed silent for decades out of fear. Rosewood was simply abandoned forever, a community erased over a story that probably never happened. 15. Imagine a whole town getting sacrificed so planes could land. Orchard Place, Illinois, was a quiet little community minding its business until Chicago decided it needed a giant airport right there. So the town was erased and paved into what became O'Hare, one of the busiest airports on Earth. The funniest part is the airport code, ORD, which makes no sense until you realize it secretly stands for Orchard, the ghost town hiding in plain sight on millions of boarding passes nobody questions. 16. Behold Indianola, Texas, a booming Gulf port that the weather personally bullied out of existence. It was a thriving harbor town with big dreams until a monster hurricane in 1875 smacked it hard. The survivors stubbornly rebuilt, dusting themselves off and insisting everything was fine. Then, in 1886, a second hurricane rolled in like a sequel nobody wanted and finished the job completely. Folks finally took the hint and left for good, surrendering the whole place back to the bare, smug beach. 17. Picture an earthquake so rude it forced an entire town to relocate. Old Valdez, Alaska, was sitting peacefully in 1964 when the most powerful quake in North American history hit, followed by a tsunami that shredded the waterfront. The ground itself turned out to be unstable mush, which is a terrible foundation for a town. So rather than gamble on another disaster, survivors said forget this and rebuilt the entire community 4 miles away on solid rock, leaving the old spot to its bad memories. 18. Meet Hanford, Washington, a town that got demolished so it could secretly help build a bomb. The government swooped in, kicked everyone out and flattened the place to make room for a massive plutonium factory. That plutonium ended up inside the bomb dropped on Nagasaki, meaning a sleepy farming town quietly became one of the most consequential spots on the planet. Residents had no clue what they were sacrificing for, just packed up and left a vague but very important hole in the map. 19. Behold Peacher, Oklahoma, a town that mined itself straight into being declared unlivable. For a century, folks dug up lead and zinc, piling the leftover toxic gravel into giant mountains that kids actually played on like playgrounds. Turns out breathing lead is a terrible hobby, and the ground was so hollowed out it could collapse at any moment. So the government declared the whole place too poisonous to exist, ordered everyone to evacuate, and let Peacher fade away under its own toxic homemade mountains. 20. Picture England's other first colony, the one nobody remembers because it folded immediately. Popham Colony in Maine launched in 1607, the very same year as the famous Jamestown, with big ambitions to claim the North. Then the colonists experienced their first brutal Maine winter and collectively decided this was absolutely not worth it. After roughly a year of freezing and grumbling, they built a ship, climbed aboard, and sailed straight back to England, abandoning the whole project and letting Jamestown hog all the glory. 21. Meet Kennecott, Alaska, a copper town that got ghosted so hard it makes your ex look loyal. The mine was pumping out absurd amounts of money, so a whole bustling community grew up around it, complete with fancy buildings in the middle of nowhere. Then the company decided the copper was tapped out and basically set everyone out now. Folks reportedly left so fast they abandoned belongings and meals on the last train. The booming town emptied almost overnight, left to freeze in silence. 22. Picture losing your entire mountain home so strangers could enjoy a nice hike. Cades Cove in Tennessee was a tight-knit community of families who had farmed those hollows for generations and were perfectly content. Then the government decided the area would make a gorgeous national park, and gorgeous parks apparently do not include actual residents. So everyone got pushed out, their cabins preserved as quaint tourist exhibits. Now millions photograph the empty homes. Clueless they are, wandering through somebody's stolen backyard. 23. Behold Buffalo Creek, West Virginia, where a coal company's laziness drowned a whole string of towns. The company piled up mining sludge into a sloppy makeshift dam, and folks basically warned them it was a ticking bomb. In 1972, that garbage dam burst and unleashed a black wall of water down the hollow, smashing communities like Saunders into splinters. Whole towns were swept clean off the map in minutes. The company had the nerve to call it an act of God, which was very convenient. 24. Meet Oscarville, Georgia, a black town that got hit with the cruelest double erasure imaginable. In 1912, a false accusation sparked a wave of terror, and white mobs violently drove every black resident out, stealing their land and burning their security. As if that humiliation were not enough, decades later, the government flooded the entire area to create Lake Lanier. So the town was first emptied by hatred and then drowned by water. Today, boaters paddle happily over a community that suffered twice. 25. Picture building a fancy seaside resort and watching the ocean slowly eat it. Bay Ocean, Oregon, was pitched as a glamorous beach paradise on a sandy spit, with a hotel, a pool, and big dreams. The developers apparently forgot that oceans do whatever they want, and the waves started gnawing at the land bit by bit. Houses tumbled into the surf one by one as residents watched their paradise crumble. Eventually, the whole town simply eroded into the sea, proving the ocean always wins. 26. Behold Cahokia, Illinois, a native city so massive it was bigger than London at the time, and almost nobody learned about it in school. Thousands of people lived here building enormous earthen pyramids, running a sprawling society with trade and astronomy long before Europeans showed up. Then, somewhat mysteriously, the whole place was abandoned and largely forgotten by 1350. The giant mounds still sit there today while tourists drive past, assuming it is just lumpy ground, completely missing an ancient metropolis. 27. Meet Pruitt-Igoe in St. Louis, the housing project that won an award and then got blown to bits. It opened as a shiny modern marvel, celebrated by architects who patted themselves on the back for solving urban living. Within a few years, it spiraled into neglect, crime, and broken everything, becoming a national embarrassment. Just about 20 years after the ribbon cutting, the city gave up entirely and dynamited the towers on live television. The dramatic collapse footage became the symbol of good intentions failing spectacularly. 28. Picture being the very first town a brand new agency decides to drown. Lewiston, Tennessee, had that special honor when the TVA built its very first dam in the 1930s. The valley was going to flood, so the residents were politely informed their homes would soon be underwater, no takebacks. They packed up and relocated while the rising reservoir swallowed everything they knew. Lewiston became the debut victim of a dam building spree, the first of many towns sacrificed for electricity and progress. 29. Behold, Rhyolite, Nevada, a desert boomtown that went from fancy to ghostly faster than a magic trick. At its peak, it had electric lights, a stock exchange, fancy buildings, and even a house made entirely of bottles because why not? Thousands of dreamers believed it would become a great city. Then, the mines underperformed, the money fled, and the whole population evaporated within just a few short years. The grand stone buildings were left standing empty in the dust, very confused about what happened. 30. Meet Love Canal, New York, a charming neighborhood built directly on top of a chemical horror buried by a company that clearly hated the future. Around 21,000 tons of toxic waste sat under the soil, and developers cheerfully built homes and a school right on top. Then, the chemicals started oozing up into basements and yards, kids got sick, and residents realized their dream neighborhood was basically a poison sandwich. The government evacuated everyone, and the place became the face of toxic cleanup disasters. 31. Picture an entire American city getting violently overthrown in the only successful coup ever pulled off on U.S. soil. Wilmington, North Carolina, in 1898 had a thriving black community and a fairly mixed government that some folks absolutely could not stand. So an armed white mob staged a full takeover, burned a black newspaper, killed people, and forced elected officials to resign at gunpoint. They literally overthrew the local government and got away with it. The black community was shattered, and history quietly looked away. 32. Meet Kaskaskia, Illinois, the state's very first capital that got bullied off the map by a moody river. This was a proud, important town until the mighty Mississippi decided to change course and basically swallow the place whole. The river rerouted itself, washed away buildings, and stranded what little remained on the wrong side entirely. The grand first capital of Illinois was reduced to a tiny speck. It is a humbling reminder that no matter how important your town feels, a river truly does not care. 33. Behold, Holland Island, Maryland, a town that slowly sank into the bay while everyone watched helplessly. Hundreds of people once lived here farming and fishing on a cozy little island in the Chesapeake. Then the land started eroding and quietly drowning, shrinking year after year as residents fled to higher ground. One stubborn last house held on for decades, standing alone in the water like the loneliest building on Earth. It finally collapsed into the bay in 2010, and the island vanished completely. 34. Picture the first legally free black settlement in America, being founded by people who escaped slavery in genius fashion. Fort Mose in Florida was established when enslaved people fled the English colonies, and the Spanish offered freedom in exchange for loyalty. So they built their own free town, armed themselves, and helped defend Spanish Florida like absolute legends. It was a remarkable middle finger to slavery decades before the country even existed. Eventually, it was abandoned to the swamp, but the bold history remains. 35. Meet Elbow Woods, North Dakota, the beating heart of 3 native nations that got drowned for a dam nobody asked them about. This community was home to the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people, with farms, schools, and a hospital along the fertile river bottom. Then the government built the Garrison Dam and casually flooded the best of their land, scattering the people across the hills. The thriving heart of 3 nations vanished underwater. The tribes were essentially handed a bill for progress they never ordered. 36. Behold Area 51, the spot so secret the government refused to admit it even existed for decades. Tucked beside Groom Lake in Nevada, this base was quietly scrubbed off public maps like an embarrassing typo. Officials would neither confirm nor deny anything, which only convinced everyone it was full of aliens and flying saucers. In reality, it was top-secret aircraft testing, but the silence created a legend. To this day, people drive out hoping to spot a UFO and find only very serious fences. 37. Picture an entire county seat getting eaten alive by a river with an attitude problem. Napoleon, Arkansas, was a bustling port town sitting where two big rivers met, full of confidence and commerce. The Mississippi, however, had other plans and slowly chewed away at the banks until the whole town was tumbling into the current. Buildings, streets, and dreams all slid into the water piece by piece. The river devoured the entire county seat hole, leaving nothing but a watery shrug where a city stood. 38. Meet Elaine, Arkansas, where black sharecroppers tried to organize for fair pay and got met with horrifying violence. In 1919, these farmers had the radical idea of asking to not be cheated, which somehow enraged powerful people. A massacre followed in which hundreds of black residents were hunted and killed, and the community was effectively wiped out. It became one of the deadliest racial attacks in American history, and yet for ages it was barely mentioned. An entire community erased for the crime of wanting fairness. 39. Behold California City, the metropolis that was supposed to rival Los Angeles and instead became the world's emptiest grid. A developer dreamed huge, carving out an enormous network of streets, cul-de-sacs, and lots across the desert, certain that crowds would flood in. Then almost nobody showed up. Today you can see miles of paved roads leading absolutely nowhere, a giant ghostly street map waiting for residents who never arrived. It is basically a city that built the skeleton and forgot to invite the body. 40. Picture a socialist utopia in the desert that was supposed to be paradise and collapsed into picturesque rubble. Llano del Rio in California was founded by idealists who wanted to build a perfect cooperative society free of greed. They put up buildings, shared everything, and dreamed of a harmonious future. Then water shortages, infighting, and plain bad luck tore the dream apart, and everyone drifted away. Now the crumbling stone ruins sit in the desert like a monument to good vibes meeting harsh reality. 41. Celilo Falls in Oregon was one of the oldest continuously inhabited spots in North America, where native people had fished the roaring rapids for thousands of years. Tribes gathered here for generations, spearing salmon in waters that thundered so loud you could hear them for miles. Then, in 1957, the government built a dam, and the falls went silent in hours as the reservoir rose. An ancient fishing site older than most countries was simply switched off like a faucet, drowned for cheaper electricity downstream. 42. Here is a geography prank that confused everyone for ages. Los Adias was the official capital of Spanish Texas, except it was not actually located in Texas at all. It sat over in Louisiana. For decades, Spain governed Texas from a spot that was technically the wrong state, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of running California from Nevada. Eventually, the Spanish king ordered everyone to abandon it and march away, emptying the misplaced capital. The settlers trudged off, leaving behind the most geographically confused government in history. 43. Corbin Hollow in Virginia was a poor mountain community minding its own business when the government got fancy ideas about scenery. Officials decided the area would make a beautiful national park, and somehow the plan involved removing the actual humans living there. So the families of Corbin Hollow were evicted from the homes their ancestors built, shoved out so tourists could admire untouched nature. The irony is brutal. Real people are raced to manufacture the illusion of pristine wilderness for visitors who would never know the difference. 44. Ocoee, Florida, learned in 1920 that simply trying to vote could get an entire community destroyed. A black man went to cast his legal ballot on election day, which apparently outraged a violent mob beyond reason. What followed was a wave of terror that killed people and burned black homes to the ground. The black residents who survived fled and never came back, leaving Ocoee essentially purged. An entire community was driven out forever over the radical, dangerous act of showing up to vote. 45. Isle Dernier in Louisiana, also called Last Island, was the place fancy folks went to escape the summer heat in luxury. It was a glamorous resort island packed with vacationing high society, enjoying balls and fine dining. Then, in 1856, a monster hurricane crashed the party and swept the entire island clean, dragging the resort, the guests, and the dance floors into the Gulf. Hundreds drowned in a single night. The playground of the rich was erased so completely that the island itself broke apart. 46. Drop City in Colorado was a famous hippie commune built entirely out of colorful geodesic domes made from scrapped car roofs. Artists and dreamers flocked here in the 1960s to live freely, make art, and reject the boring square world, quite literally choosing rounded houses instead. It became iconic, a glittering symbol of countercultural cool. Then, the free-spirited chaos that made it special also made it unsustainable, and the whole place fizzled out. The domes were abandoned, and the famous utopia simply melted away. 47. Kennett, California, was a busy mining town full of workers, saloons, and the usual rough-and-tumble frontier energy. People lived, worked, and brawled here for years, never imagining their town had an expiration date. Then the government built Shasta Dam, and the rising reservoir had other plans for the valley. Kennett was swallowed completely beneath Shasta Lake, sinking out of sight like it had never existed. Now anglers float over the drowned streets, casting lines above a town that is having a permanent bath. 48. Beneath a mountain in Pennsylvania hides Raven Rock, the so-called underground Pentagon, built so leaders could keep running things during a nuclear apocalypse. The military carved an entire secret complex right into solid rock, complete with everything needed to survive doomsday in style. While ordinary people had no idea, an entire hidden government facility sat humming inside the mountain. It was the ultimate panic room for the country, designed so that even if everything topside got vaporized, the bureaucracy would heroically survive to keep filing paperwork. 49. Gilman, Colorado, was a mining town perched dramatically on a cliff, which honestly sounds terrifying, but the residents managed fine for decades. Then it turned out all that mining had left the place soaked in toxic contamination, and the area got slapped with the dreaded Superfund label. The government sealed the whole town off and ordered everyone gone, declaring it too poisoned for people. So Gilman sits abandoned on its cliff today, a creepy ghost town with great views and absolutely no one allowed to enjoy them. 50. The Ohio village nicknamed Helltown. Around Boston Mills got quietly bought up and demolished by the National Park Service, and the spooky vacuum it left birthed wild legends. After the homes were cleared for a park expansion that got tangled in delays, the abandoned buildings just sat there looking ominous. Locals invented stories about cults, mutants, and satanic happenings to explain the eerie emptiness. In reality, it was just government paperwork and bulldozers, but Helltown became a legendary haunted spot built entirely on bureaucratic awkwardness. 51. Dogtown, Massachusetts, was once a respectable colonial village, but over time the respectable people left and the situation got weird. As the town declined, it filled up with widows, outcasts, rumored witches, and packs of stray dogs, which is how it earned its delightful name. The last residents reportedly included fortune tellers and characters nobody wanted to mess with. Eventually, everyone died off or wandered away, and the woods swallowed the whole place. Now it survives only as crumbling cellar holes and spooky legends. 52. Thistle, Utah, got taken out by a landslide that decided to become a dam without anyone's permission. In 1983, a massive chunk of hillside slid down and blocked the river, which sounds minor until you realize it created an instant lake right where the town was sitting. The water rose and rose, drowning homes and the railroad as residents watched their town transform into a reservoir. Thistle vanished beneath the new lake, becoming one of the most expensive landslides in American history. 53. The town of Mauch Chunk, Pennsylvania, did something genuinely bizarre. It sold its own identity for a corpse. Struggling for fame, the town struck a deal with the widow of athlete Jim Thorpe, agreeing to bury his body there and rename itself after him, despite Thorpe never once setting foot in the place. So Mauch Chunk erased its own name and became Jim Thorpe, hoping the dead Olympian would bring tourists. It worked well enough, making it the only town that rebranded entirely around a stranger's grave. 54. Merritt Island, Florida, was a quiet stretch of small towns and citrus groves until the space race came knocking with big demands. The government decided this was the perfect launch pad for reaching the moon, so it bought out the residents and cleared the land for the Kennedy Space Center. Families who had farmed there for generations packed up so rockets could blast off from their backyards. The sleepy little communities vanished, replaced by towering gantries and the roar of astronauts heading literally off the planet. 55. Underneath a fancy West Virginia resort sat a colossal secret bunker built to hide the entire United States Congress during a nuclear war. For 30 years, the luxurious Greenbrier hosted unsuspecting vacationers sipping cocktails directly above a hidden doomsday shelter, stocked for hundreds of lawmakers. There were dormitories, a chamber for Congress, and even decontamination showers, all disguised behind a normal-looking resort. Guests had no clue they were partying on top of the government's apocalypse hideout until a newspaper finally exposed the whole ridiculous thing. 56. North Brother Island in New York City was a grim quarantine island where the sick got shipped to be conveniently forgotten. Its most famous resident was Typhoid Mary, the cook who unknowingly spread disease and got exiled here for years against her will. The island held a hospital for contagious patients, basically a place to stash people society found inconvenient. Eventually, it was abandoned entirely, and now the crumbling buildings sit overgrown in the East River, a creepy ruin most New Yorkers do not even know exists. 57. Cahaba was proudly chosen as Alabama's very first state capital, which lasted about as long as a New Year's resolution. The location turned out to be a swampy, flood-prone disaster, and the capital got moved away pretty quickly once everyone realized their grand city kept turning into a lake. Slowly, the residents drifted off too, abandoning the streets and buildings to the encroaching wilderness. Today, Cahaba is a complete ghost town, a former capital with nothing left but ruins, eerie quiet, and regretful geography. 58. Black Bottom in Detroit was a vibrant black neighborhood packed with businesses, music, and community life, and the city paved right over it. In the name of urban renewal and a shiny new freeway, planners bulldozed the entire neighborhood and replaced it with concrete and on-ramps. Thousands of residents were displaced, their homes and culture flattened so cars could move slightly faster. A thriving community became a highway, and today drivers zoom over it completely unaware they are speeding across an erased neighborhood. 59. Pierce City, Missouri, turned itself into a so-called sundown town through pure violence and never looked back. After an accusation in 1901, a white mob went on a rampage, killing black residents and burning their homes to force every black family out of town entirely. They succeeded, and the town then enforced a brutal unwritten rule that black people should not be there after dark. An entire population was violently expelled, and the community simply erased its black residents from existence and quietly moved on. 60. Kelly, Wyoming, got wiped out by what was basically nature loading a giant water balloon and then popping it. In 1925, a huge landslide dammed up the river, forming a big new lake held back by a wall of loose debris. For 2 years, it sat there ominously, and in 1927, the natural dam suddenly gave way, releasing a violent flood that roared down the valley. The wall of water smashed into Kelly and swept most of the town away, leaving disaster where a community stood. 61. Wamoni, Nevada, was a gold boomtown that lived fast and died almost instantly, like a firework with commitment issues. In 1928, word spread of gold, and within weeks, thousands of hopefuls stampeded into the desert, throwing up tents and businesses. The excitement was electric, the dreams were huge, and then the gold turned out to be mostly a rumor. Almost as fast as it appeared, the town emptied out completely. Later, the whole area got swallowed inside the Nevada nuclear test site, getting erased a second time. 62. West Hurley, New York, got demolished and drowned so that faraway city folks could turn on their faucets without a thought. To build the Ashokan Reservoir supplying New York City, officials cleared out entire communities, tearing down homes and even relocating the dead from cemeteries. The residents were pushed aside, and the valley was flooded to quench the thirst of millions downstream. West Hurley disappeared beneath the water, sacrificed so that someone in a distant apartment could fill a glass and never wonder where it came from. 63. Mercury, Nevada, is a town that technically exists but good luck ever visiting, because it sits inside the Nevada nuclear test site. This was a closed government town built to house the workers who tested atomic bombs out in the desert, complete with a bowling alley and cafeteria for nuke employees. Regular people simply cannot go there, as it remains locked behind serious government gates. It is a real community that functions in near-total secrecy, a town that quietly exists while officially staying out of public reach. 64. Hinckley, California, slowly emptied out after becoming the real-life setting of the famous Aaron Brockovich poisoning case. A utility company had let toxic chromium seep into the groundwater for years, quietly poisoning the people who lived there while insisting everything was fine. The legal battle became a Hollywood movie, but the actual town did not get a happy ending. As the contamination spread, residents took buyouts and left, and Hinckley gradually faded into near nothing, a community that essentially dissolved after its water turned against it. 65. Thurmond, West Virginia, was a roaring railroad boomtown so busy it once handled more freight than major cities, packed with trains, money, and noise. It was the beating heart of the coal-hauling business, with hotels and constant activity buzzing around the tracks. Then the railroads switched from coal to diesel, the trains stopped needing the town, and the whole place quietly collapsed. Today, Thurmond has a population you can count on one hand, a former powerhouse reduced to a near-empty relic beside the silent tracks. 66. Paradise, California, suffered one of the cruelest names in disaster history when the 2018 Camp Fire turned it to ash in mere hours. The wildfire moved so fast that residents fled through walls of flame, abandoning cars and racing to escape as the entire town ignited around them. Thousands of homes vanished, and a thriving community was reduced to smoldering rubble almost overnight. The town literally named Paradise became a scorched wasteland in a single morning, one of the deadliest and fastest erasures the state had ever seen. 67. East St. Louis, Illinois, became the site of a horrifying 1917 massacre that destroyed entire black neighborhoods over economic resentment. Tensions over black workers boiled into a savage explosion of mob violence, with white rioters burning homes and attacking residents in the streets. Whole blocks went up in flames as families fled for their lives across the river. The death toll was staggering, and thriving black communities were wiped out in the chaos. It stands as one of the deadliest racial attacks the country tried hard to forget. 68. Sterlingville and the other Pine Camp villages in New York got condemned and erased in 1941 so the Army could have more room to play with tanks. As World War II ramped up, the military decided it needed to expand its training base, and the small hamlets in the way simply had to go. Residents were given little notice and pushed off their land, their homes flattened for military maneuvers. Entire communities vanished so soldiers could practice, sacrificed quietly to the war effort, and never rebuilt. 69. Glen Rio, sitting right on the Texas and New Mexico border, was a lively Route 66 town that thrived on travelers until the interstate stabbed it in the back. For years, cars rolled through, stopping at its motels, gas stations, and diners along the famous highway. Then, the new interstate was built and bypassed the town entirely, and the traffic vanished overnight. Without passing travelers, Glen Rio dried up and died, left as a haunting strip of abandoned buildings staring out at the road that forgot it existed. 70. Bombay Beach, California, was a glamorous 1950s resort town on the Salton Sea, where vacationers water-skied and dreamed of desert paradise. The problem was the Salton Sea itself, an accidental lake that engineers basically created by mistake, and it slowly turned into a toxic, salty, fish-killing nightmare. As the water reeked and receded, the tourists fled and the resort dream rotted away. Bombay Beach emptied out, leaving behind a surreal, half-abandoned town where rusted ruins sit beside a dying sea that smells like regret. 71. Wendover, Utah, hid one of the biggest secrets of World War II. It was the lonely desert base where the crews who would bomb Hiroshima quietly trained. Out in the middle of nowhere, pilots practiced dropping dummy bombs over and over without being told what they were really preparing for. The isolation kept the whole mission hush-hush, with even the airmen left guessing about their purpose. This unremarkable patch of desert secretly shaped one of history's most world-changing moments while looking like the most boring place imaginable. 72. Penikese Island, Massachusetts, served the grim role of a leprosy colony where the state shipped sick people to be exiled and forgotten. Patients diagnosed with the disease were sent to this isolated island against their will, separated from family and society out of fear and stigma. They lived out their days stranded on a tiny speck of land, basically banished. Eventually, the colony was shut down and the island abandoned entirely. It became a haunting reminder of how readily people once exiled the sick simply to avoid them. 73. Jerome, Arizona, proudly carried the title of wickedest town in the West, a copper mining hub overflowing with saloons, gambling, and questionable life choices. Perched on a steep hillside, it was rowdy, rich, and reportedly so sinful that a newspaper gave it that infamous nickname. Thousands lived and misbehaved there during the mining heyday. Then the copper played out, the mines closed, and the population crashed almost to zero, leaving a near ghost town clinging to the mountainside, still slightly smirking about its scandalous glory days. 74. Rondo in St. Paul, Minnesota, was a thriving black neighborhood full of homes, businesses, and tight community bonds. And Interstate 94 sliced it cleanly in half. City planners decided the freeway should plow right through the heart of Rondo, displacing hundreds of families and destroying the neighborhood's core. Homes were demolished, the community was fractured, and a vibrant culture was buried under concrete and traffic. A whole world was erased so commuters could shave a few minutes off their drive, never knowing what once stood there. 75. Colfax, Louisiana, witnessed an 1873 massacre so brutal it crushed black self-government and the community along with it. After a disputed election, a heavily armed white mob attacked black defenders gathered at the courthouse, slaughtering them in horrifying numbers. The massacre effectively ended black political power in the area through pure terror. The thriving sense of community and self-rule was wiped out, replaced by fear. It became one of the bloodiest days of the era, a violent erasure that history shamefully tried to gloss over for generations. 76. Portsmouth, North Carolina, was once a busy Outer Banks port town, humming with shipping and life, and it slowly faded until its population hit exactly zero. As the shipping channels shifted and storms battered the coast, the reasons to stay simply dried up one by one. Residents trickled away over the decades until the very last people finally left, locking the door on an entire town. Now, Portsmouth sits perfectly preserved and completely empty, a tidy little ghost town where the population count is a clean, lonely nothing. 77. Hot Springs, New Mexico, did something genuinely unhinged in 1950. It legally renamed itself after a radio game show to win a publicity contest. A popular program offered to broadcast from any town willing to take its name, and Hot Springs eagerly volunteered, becoming Truth or Consequences forever. So an entire town permanently erased its own perfectly nice name just to score some radio fame and tourist attention. To this day, the place is officially called Truth or Consequences, a town that sold its identity for a gimmick and kept it. 78. Monticello, California, was a peaceful farming town in a lovely valley until the government decided the valley would look better full of water. To create Lake Berryessa, officials cleared out Monticello, relocated the residents, and even dug up the cemetery before flooding everything. The town vanished beneath the new reservoir, which became famous for its bizarre, funnel-shaped drain, nicknamed the Glory Hole, that swallows water like a giant bathtub plug. So Monticello now rests underwater, beside one of the weirdest-looking spillways anyone has ever seen. 79. Manzanar, California, was a town-sized prison built in the desert to lock up Japanese Americans during World War II simply for their ancestry. Thousands of innocent people, including children, were forced from their homes and confined behind barbed wire in hastily built barracks. They created schools, gardens, and a community inside their own incarceration, making the best of an outrageous injustice. After the war, the camp was dismantled, and the site returned to bare desert, erasing a shameful chapter the country preferred not to display. 80. Randolph, Tennessee, was a booming river town with serious ambitions until Union troops burned it down in 1862 as payback during the Civil War. The town had grown wealthy on river trade and once rivaled Memphis in importance, swaggering with confidence about its bright future. Then, in retaliation for nearby attacks on boats, soldiers torched the place to the ground. The thriving river town was reduced to ashes and never rebuilt, its big dreams going up in smoke as a casualty of wartime revenge and bad timing. 81. Morrisonville, Louisiana, was slowly disassembled and carried away piece by piece by a chemical company until literally nothing remained. The plant sat right next door pumping out pollution, and rather than clean things up, the company simply bought out the residents and relocated them one home at a time. Founded by freed slaves generations earlier, the historic community was quietly dismantled in slow motion. House by house, family by family, Morrisonville was erased so completely that the town just gradually evaporated into the company's expanding footprint. 82. Empire, Nevada, was a tidy company town built entirely around a gypsum plant, where everyone worked, lived, and depended on the same single employer. Life rolled along fine until 2011, when the plant shut down and the company basically turned off the whole town like a light switch. Residents were given the boot, a literal fence was built around the place, and the post office retired its zip code entirely. Empire became a gated ghost town, a community that vanished the moment its one job disappeared. 83. Haiti in Durham, North Carolina, was a flourishing black business district bursting with shops, theaters, and self-made success until urban renewal flattened it. City planners labeled the thriving neighborhood as something to be improved, then bulldozed huge swaths of it to make room for a highway and redevelopment. The vibrant black-owned businesses and community life were demolished in the name of progress that mostly benefited everyone else. A proud, prosperous district was razed, replaced by concrete, leaving residents to watch decades of hard work erased overnight. 84. Allensworth, California, was a remarkable town founded entirely by Black Americans determined to build a self-sufficient community free from discrimination, and it actually thrived for a while. Residents ran their own farms, school, and businesses with genuine pride and independence. Then the water supply mysteriously dwindled, allegedly steered away by outside interests, and the town slowly withered without it. The bold dream of Black self-determination dried up alongside the wells. Allensworth faded into near abandonment, undone not by failure but by the simple, cruel act of cutting off its water. 85. Hog Island, also called Broadwater, was a whole town perched on a Virginia barrier island until the rising sea decided to repossess it. People lived, fished, and built homes out there, confidently ignoring the fact that barrier islands are basically just sand having a temporary moment. As the ocean crept higher and storms gnawed at the land, the island became uninhabitable. Residents eventually floated their houses to the mainland and fled, surrendering the whole town to the waves. The sea swallowed Broadwater, reclaiming the island entirely. 86. Brook Farm, Massachusetts, was a famous intellectual utopia where brilliant thinkers gathered to live simply, farm the land, and discuss lofty ideas about perfecting society. The problem was that a commune full of philosophers turned out to be much better at debating than at actually farming. They struggled financially while passionately theorizing about a better world. Then a fire burned down their grand new building, and the whole idealistic experiment collapsed under debt and discouragement. The famous utopia dissolved, proving big ideas rarely pay the bills. 87. Corydon, Pennsylvania, was a Seneca community that got flooded by a dam despite a treaty from 1794, literally promising it would never happen. The United States had signed a solemn agreement guaranteeing the Seneca their land forever, which apparently had an expiration date nobody mentioned. To build the Kinzua Dam, the government broke that ancient promise, flooded the valley, and forced the Seneca from their homes. An entire community vanished underwater, its people displaced, and a centuries-old treaty was casually tossed aside like it meant nothing at all. 88. Nauvoo, Illinois, was a Mormon boomtown that grew so fast it briefly rivaled Chicago, swelling with thousands of devoted settlers building an impressive city on the river. Then, mounting hostility from neighbors and the killing of their leader made staying impossible, and in 1846, the Mormons were essentially driven out. They packed up en masse, and trekked west toward Utah, emptying the bustling city almost overnight. A thriving metropolis that nearly became the biggest in the state was abandoned in a sudden dramatic exodus into the wilderness. 89. Scattered secretly around American cities sat the Nike missile sites, a hidden network of nuclear-tipped missiles ready to blast down Soviet bombers during the Cold War. Ordinary suburbanites went about their lives with no idea that launch sites loaded with serious firepower were tucked into nearby fields and hills. The whole ring stood quietly armed, waiting for an attack that thankfully never came. When missiles improved, the sites became obsolete and were quietly dismantled and erased, leaving most people unaware they ever lived beside the apocalypse. 90. The Tox Island project around Walpack, New Jersey, displaced thousands of people for a dam that was then never even built, which is the ultimate bureaucratic gut punch. The government bought up entire villages, evicted families from generations-old homes, and cleared the valley in preparation for a massive reservoir. Then the project got canceled after all that destruction. So the people lost everything for nothing, and the emptied villages were left to rot into eerie ghost towns, monuments to a flood that authorities simply decided never to make. 91. Vieques, Puerto Rico, had most of its island seized by the Navy, which then spent 60 years using it as a live bombing range while actual people lived there. The military dropped real bombs and tested weapons just down the road from residents trying to raise families, which is a wild thing to tolerate for that long. Locals endured the constant explosions and contamination until massive protests in 2003 finally forced the Navy to stop. The bombing ended, but only after decades of treating a populated island like a target. 92. Height, Utah, was a small town that got drowned the moment Glen Canyon Dam closed and Lake Powell began swallowing everything in sight. The town sat in a canyon that was about to become a giant reservoir, so the residents had to clear out as the water steadily rose. Height disappeared beneath the new lake, joining the growing club of communities sacrificed for hydroelectric ambition. Now boaters cruise over the spot, and when droughts lower the lake, hints of the drowned town occasionally peek back out. 93. Terlingua, Texas, was a busy mercury mining town where workers dug up quicksilver until the day the quicksilver simply stopped showing up. The whole town existed because of that shiny toxic metal, so when the mines played out, there was no longer any reason to stick around. Workers drifted off, businesses closed, and Terlingua emptied into a dusty ghost town baking in the desert sun. The mercury that built it also doomed it, leaving behind abandoned ruins and a town that lived and died entirely by liquid metal. 94. Overtown in Miami was nicknamed the Harlem of the South, a dazzling black cultural hub full of music, nightlife, and famous performers, until an interstate was rammed straight through its heart. City planners routed the highway directly into the thriving neighborhood, demolishing homes and businesses and scattering tens of thousands of residents. The vibrant clubs and bustling streets were gutted and buried under concrete overpasses. A glittering center of black culture was hollowed out so cars could pass through, erasing a community that once pulsed with life. 95. Mission San Saba in Texas was a Spanish mission that met a swift and brutal end in 1758 when frontier warriors attacked and destroyed it. The Spanish had set up the mission hoping to convert local tribes, but tensions with the surrounding nations boiled over dramatically. A large force descended on the mission, killed people, and burned the place down, sending a clear message about who controlled the frontier. The Spanish never rebuilt it, abandoning the charred ruins and chalking the whole venture up as a painful failure. 96. Deerfield, Colorado, was a hopeful black farming colony where families worked to build prosperity from the dry plains through sheer determination and grit. For a time it flourished, with homes, farms, and a real sense of community pride taking root. Then the brutal combination of drought and the Great Depression hammered the settlement relentlessly, drying up crops and savings alike. Families had no choice but to leave, and Deerfield slowly emptied into near abandonment. The ambitious dream withered under dust and hard times, leaving only a few lonely buildings. 97. Valmeyer, Illinois, did something refreshingly clever after the catastrophic 1993 flood nearly wiped it out. It simply picked up and moved the entire town to higher ground. Tired of being a punching bag for the Mississippi River, Residents decided rebuilding in the floodplain was foolish and relocated the whole community up onto a nearby bluff. They rebuilt homes, schools, and businesses safely above the water's reach. While most flooded towns just vanish, Valmeyer pulled off the rare move of dodging disaster by literally relocating itself uphill. 98. Octagon City, Kansas, was a vegetarian utopia that fell apart almost the instant it was founded, which is impressively fast even for a utopia. Idealists were lured west by glowing promises of a thriving meat-free paradise laid out in tidy octagon shapes. When they arrived, they found basically nothing prepared, no real shelter, harsh conditions, and a serious gap between the brochure and reality. Disillusioned and hungry, the settlers scattered almost immediately, and the grand vegetarian dream collapsed before it ever truly began. A utopia gone in a blink. 99. Uravan, Colorado, was a uranium company town so thoroughly radioactive that the solution was to demolish it and bury the entire place as nuclear waste. For years, it processed uranium and vanadium, leaving the whole town soaked in dangerous contamination. When the dangers became undeniable, officials did not just close Uravan, they dismantled it completely and entombed the remains like hazardous trash. An entire community was literally buried as radioactive waste, erased so thoroughly that the town was treated as the very poison it had spent decades producing. 100. Proctor, North Carolina, got drowned and cut off when Fontana Lake flooded the area, leaving its former residents reachable only by a famously broken promise. The government had pledged to build a road connecting families to their old homes and cemeteries across the new lake, but that road was never properly finished. It became known as the Road to Nowhere, a literal highway that just stops. So Proctor sits isolated beyond the water, accessible only by boat or hiking, abandoned and stranded by a promise authorities never kept. 101. Deep in the Great Dismal Swamp along Virginia and North Carolina, thousands of escaped enslaved people built hidden settlements and thrived for generations right under everyone's nose. These communities, known as Maroons, chose to live in a brutal mosquito-infested swamp because it was still far better than slavery. They farmed secret patches of dry land, raised families, and stayed invisible for decades. Eventually, the settlements vanished into history, leaving behind one of the most quietly heroic acts of freedom the country ever managed to ignore. 102. The hamlets around Mammoth Cave in Kentucky got cleared out and erased so the area could become a national park for tourists to admire. Several small communities of families lived above and around the famous cave system, going about ordinary lives. Then the government decided the land would serve better as a protected attraction, so residents were removed and their towns dissolved. The people vanished while the cave stayed, and now visitors stroll through the underground wonder with no clue. Entire communities were swept aside to make room. 103. Soldiers. Grove, Wisconsin, got so fed up with constant flooding that it did the unthinkable. It relocated the entire town to higher ground on purpose. After the river repeatedly drowned the place, residents realized the smartest move was to simply stop living in the river's path. So they packed up the whole downtown and rebuilt it uphill, becoming one of the first towns to relocate rather than keep mopping up. While other towns stubbornly drowned again and again, Soldiers Grove just shrugged and moved out of the way. 104. Zor, Ohio, was a communal religious society where everyone shared property, worked together, and lived by strict cooperative ideals for several decades. The German separatists who founded it pooled their resources and built a surprisingly successful little world apart from mainstream America. But over time, the younger generation grew less interested in the rigid communal lifestyle, and the unity slowly unraveled. Eventually, the society formally dissolved and divided up its property, ending the experiment. The shared way of life simply faded as the dream lost its grip on its own children. 105. The town of Wellington, Washington, witnessed the deadliest avalanche in American history in 1910, when a massive wall of snow swept two parked trains right off the mountain. Passengers had been stranded for days by a blizzard, waiting nervously as snow piled up ominously above them. Then the slope let go, hurling the trains into the canyon and killing scores of people. The horror was so profound that the rail town was renamed to escape its grim reputation, and eventually it was abandoned entirely. 106. Sheniko, Oregon, proudly called itself the wool capital of the world, a booming hub where enormous quantities of wool flowed through on the way to market. The town thrived entirely because the railroad ran through it, bringing business, money, and bustling activity. Then a new rail line got built that bypassed Sheniko completely, and just like that, the lifeblood was cut off. Without the trains, the wool empire collapsed and the people drifted away. Sheniko withered into a near ghost town, undone by a railroad that simply chose a different route. 107. Kapoho, Hawaii, had the spectacularly bad luck of getting buried by lava not once but twice, like the volcano had a personal vendetta. In 1960, Kilauea sent molten rock pouring over the town, swallowing homes and erasing it. Stubborn and hopeful, people rebuilt in the area anyway, betting the volcano was done. Then in 2018, Kilauea erupted again and buried the rebuilt community under fresh lava all over again. Kapoho became the town that nature destroyed twice, proving that arguing with an active volcano is a losing strategy. 108. Lake Peigneur, Louisiana, was the site of one of the most absurd disasters imaginable, when a drilling rig in 1980 accidentally punched straight into a salt mine beneath the lake. The hole acted like a giant bathtub drain, and the entire lake began swirling down into the earth in a massive whirlpool. The vortex swallowed barges, the drilling rig, trees, and even an island's gardens, sucking everything into the ground. Water reversed and refilled it later, but the bizarre day rewrote the whole landscape in mere hours. 109. Eagle Mountain, California, was a sealed-off company town built around an iron mine, where workers and families lived a tidy, isolated existence revolving around the pit. When the mine shut down, the town emptied out and was eventually locked away from the public entirely, fenced off and guarded. Various plans to repurpose the place came and went, but mostly it just sat there abandoned behind locked gates. Eagle Mountain became a ghost town nobody is allowed to visit, a fully built community quietly rotting behind serious no trespassing signs. 110. Glen Rio aside, few Route 66 ghosts compare to the slow death of America's old roadside towns. But the lesser-known story here is the sheer scale of erasure across the country. Towns founded from mines, mills, and railroads kept vanishing the instant their single reason for existing disappeared. Whole communities lived and died by one industry, booming with confidence and then evaporating overnight when the money left. The American map is quietly littered with these forgotten places, proving that no town is ever quite as permanent as it believes. 111. The most unsettling truth across all these vanished places is how easily an entire community can be wiped from memory once it is gone. Some were drowned for water and power, others burned by hatred, evicted for parks, or simply abandoned when the jobs disappeared. People laughed, argued, raised families, and built lives in every single one, fully convinced their town would last forever. Yet the maps were redrawn and the world moved on without a second thought. These erased places remind us that permanence is mostly just an illusion. And that is 111 places America quietly wiped off the map and hoped you would never notice. Towns drowned for a glass of water, burned out of pure spite, bulldozed for parking lots, and erased so smoothly that millions walk right over them today without a clue. Now here is the real question. Which one shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments because honestly, some of these still feel illegal. If your brain feels slightly weirder than before, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and stick around, because here at Dumb History we dig up the stuff your teachers were too scared to mention. See you in the next one.